The lights of the nightclub flickered erratically, creating a hypnotic effect on the dancing crowd. The electronic music pulsed through the air, infecting everyone with a vibrant and youthful energy, as if this night would be an endless celebration. The neon colors blended with the shadows, and the walls of the dance floor vibrated to the rhythm of the music. Each beat of the bass seemed to enter the bodies of those present, making them move in perfect synchrony with the sound. If you're feeling the chills, subscribe for more scary stories. In the middle of the crowd, a group of friends was immersed in the fun. Rachel, Luke, Emily, and Jason were sitting at a table, surrounded by strangers, but all sharing the same festive spirit. They laughed and danced, surrendering to the rhythm of the night. Alcohol made their heads spin, and the laughter seemed genuine. "Tonight's ours," Luke said, raising his glass and looking at his friends. There were no worries here. Everything seemed perfect, too perfect. But as they danced, a subtle discomfort began to creep into the atmosphere. A fleeting look exchanged between two strangers, a hesitant expression on the face of a woman beside them, who seemed paler than the nightclub's lighting allowed. A shiver ran down Emily's spine, but she shrugged it off, attributing the sensation to a simple cold. Every now and then, a distant sound, an echo or whisper, would cut through the electronic music as if coming from somewhere deep and unknown. But nothing seemed to alter the frantic pace of the party, until something more subtle caught Rachel's attention. The shadows on the wall began to dance strangely, as if something else were there, something that shouldn't be. She tried to focus on the music, but something in the air seemed to stir. The smell of sweat mixed with alcohol grew stronger, but there was another odor, foul like rotting meat. She turned to Luke, but what she saw wasn't a confident friend anymore. He was paler, his eyes losing their liveliness, as if something were erasing his humanity, leaving an unsettling void behind. "Are you okay?" she asked hesitantly. He smiled blankly, without conviction, and that was when she felt it. A cold shiver ran down her spine. Whatever was happening, it was not normal. Then the music grew quieter, muffled, as if something had altered the environment. The dance floor was no longer a place of joy, but a field of tension. Rachel looked around and saw more signs that something was wrong. A woman at the bar, smiling at her partner, had her smile interrupted when her eyes began to glow a reddish hue. She let out a low grunt, as if an unbearable pain was invading her body. Rachel furrowed her brow, unable to comprehend what was happening. The couple beside them also looked uneasy, their gazes crossing strangely, as if they recognized something in each other, something monstrous. Then, with a snap, the woman turned and, with a sudden and uncontrollable movement, pulled her partner's hair, yanking him out of his chair. The sound of leather tearing was deafening, but the worst was yet to come. She was no longer human. Her body appeared distorted, pale skin, almost translucent, covered in deformed bone structure. Her hands, now sharp claws, shredded the man's face as he tried to scream. Comment below what the scariest part has been so far. The crowd stopped. Shock spread like a virus. What was happening here? What was happening to those who still remained human? Screams began to echo through the nightclub, but the sound of the music, which had once dominated the environment, was now drowned out by the growls and snarls of the creatures. Rachel looked at Luke, but he was no longer the friend she had started the night with. His eyes were dull, lifeless, and his jaw moved in a mechanical way, as if about to fall apart. He took a step toward her, his teeth visibly elongated, and his nails now resembling sharp claws. But Rachel couldn't believe what she saw. Not him, not Luke. By this point, chaos had already taken over the hall. People were running, some desperate, others with their bodies starting to distort, losing their humanity. The dance floor was no longer a place of fun, but pure carnage. The creatures, now visible everywhere, moved like predators, hunting those who remained. And amidst the darkness, Rachel began to notice something even more terrifying. These creatures, they weren't transforming by accident. It was something deliberate planned. The nightclub, the place where everyone sought pleasure and distraction, was the perfect stage for a ritual of horror that renewed itself every cycle. Rachel, Luke, and the others, now aware of what was happening, found themselves in a frantic fight for survival. The creatures were everywhere, turning the nightclub into a hell of flesh and blood. The smell of rot mixed with the despair of the innocent screams. If you're feeling creeped out, share this video with someone who loves a good scare. As Rachel tried to drag Luke away, a stronger presence, a monstrous figure, emerged from the shadows. The entity, which seemed to have control over the transformation, smiled grotesquely. "You're seeing what's always been before your eyes," it said, in a guttural, threatening voice. The chaos in the nightclub was total. The lights flickered, but with a regular frequency, as if they were trying to fight against the darkness that was taking over the place. The sound of the electronic music now seemed distant, like an echo from a time when the party still existed. In the middle of it all, Rachel, Luke, Emily, and Jason found themselves disoriented, trying to escape the horde of hungry creatures that now occupied the corners of a nightclub. Don't miss out. Subscribe and hit the bell for more spine-chilling tales. "Come on, quickly," Rachel shouted, pulling Luke by the hand, but he seemed to be in a trance. His eyes, now completely red, were fixated on something distant, and his body, still human but distorted, trembled with an insane desire. He was no longer with her. His mind had already been lost to the thing taking over his body. Emily and Jason ran after Rachel, but the scene around them was a true vision of hell. The floor was covered with blood, lifeless bodies, and others in transformation. They found a small refuge at the bar, where, among the wreckage, they tried to hide from the predatory gaze of the creatures hunting them like prey. Want more stories like this? Subscribe now and prepare for the worst. But something was wrong. The nightclub, although full of screams and chaos, seemed very quiet at times, as if something was waiting, something even greater. Emily's fixed gaze found something unusual, a figure standing in the darkest corner of the room, someone who seemed to be watching everything calmly. "Look," she whispered, her eyes wide open. It was a woman with long black hair, her expression one of pure indifference to the horror happening around her. She didn't seem scared, not even surprised. What was most unsettling was that, around her, the shadows were moving, as if she was somehow connected to them. As the group hid, trying to understand what was happening, a strange sensation enveloped them. Something was being revealed there, and the pieces were starting to fit together, though in a terrifying way. "These creatures, what are they?" Jason asked, his voice trembling. He couldn't understand. It was as if part of his brain was denying reality, trying to resist the idea that this wasn't some hallucination. And why is this happening now? Why did Emily, always the curious one, saw a door partially open at the back of the nightclub? "We need to know what's going on." "Here's the answer. I feel it." They crossed the dark and filthy space of the nightclub, their steps muffled by the blood on the floor. When they reached the door, a dense and heavy air enveloped them. The room was empty, except for some boxes and rusty furniture. But most important were the papers scattered across the table in the corner. Like if you can't take your eyes off the screen. Emily grabbed one of the papers. The handwriting was difficult to read, as if the text were marked with some strange, almost living ink. She translated the words to herself, although as she was reading was growing more and more terrifying. "At midnight, they will come. The dance of darkness cannot be interrupted. When the final beat plays, the chosen ones will be transformed, and the dance will begin again." "Chosen," Jason murmured, his mind beginning to comprehend what those words meant. But before he could elaborate further, he froze, his eyes widening and his voice trembling. "Rachel, look, they were here before. What's happening to them?" What seemed like a simple phrase now took on a much darker tone. The transformation, the curse, wasn't an accident, but part of a cycle, something deeper than any of them could imagine. "So what do we do now?" Rachel asked, feeling the tension rise in her throat. Those words, chosen and dance of darkness, kept echoing in her mind. Before anyone could respond, the woman with black hair appeared before them, as if she had come out of the shadows. Her eyes, completely dark, reflected an absolute void. She looked at them with a strange smile, but it wasn't a smile of satisfaction. It was a smile of someone who knew what would happen next. Someone who understood the future in a grotesque way. "You're looking for answers, but answers no longer matter," she said, her voice soft but filled with incomprehensible power. "Who are you?" Emily asked, stepping forward. "What's happening with the nightclub?" The woman smiled once more, but didn't answer right away. She looked toward the corners of the room, where the shadows seemed to stir, as if alive. "This place is more than just a club. It is a portal, a meeting point between the living and the dead. Every night, it opens its doors, the curse renews. Every cycle, a soul is lost. But today, the flesh will transform." With these words, she slowly retreated, as if disappearing into the shadows. But before she completely vanished, she whispered in a tone that made everyone's blood run cold. "And you are already part of the atmosphere in the nightclub had completely changed. What had once been a place of fun and euphoria had become a field of horror, where the line between life and death was becoming more and more blurred. The music, which had once echoed across the dance floor, was now drowned out by the sounds of screams and growls, mixed with the strange whispers and snaps that emerged from the shadows. The light flickered irregularly, as if it were fighting against the sinister presence that was taking over the place. Rachel, Luke, Emily, and Jason were surrounded by terror, but they were still trying to make sense of everything that was happening. Each of them watched as the people around them transformed, the distortions taking over their bodies and minds. The creatures that had once been just scary figures now moved with insane violence, their mouths deformed as they opened to scream, their sharp claws tearing apart anything in their path. But the most terrifying thing was seeing how some of the people there, people who had been dancing with them just minutes ago, began to lose their human form. They were becoming monsters, their expressions twisting in fury, as if an indescribable pain was breaking their minds. Luke, still under the effect of the transformation, began to show visible signs of becoming one of those creatures. His eyes turned red, and his pale skin began to stretch, as if it were adjusting to a new form. He tried to speak, but the voice that came from his mouth was guttural, full of primal anguish. His teeth started to elongate, and his claws began to emerge from his fingers. Rachel, horrified, didn't know what to do. He looked at her with a vacant stare, yet at the same time with a primitive ferocity. He was no longer the friend she had known. "Luke, no, please," she screamed, but her voice was lost in the chaos unfolding around them. He didn't respond. He simply advanced, faster than she could imagine, with hunger and a desire for destruction in his eyes. Emily tried to act quickly, grabbing Rachel by the shoulders and pulling her away, while Jason, pale-faced, watched in shock as their friend's transformation took over. "There's nothing more we can do for him," Jason said, his expression devastated. "He's beyond us. The thing he's become isn't Luke anymore." It was a horrifying sight. People they knew, friends and strangers, now nothing but shadows of their humanity. Their bodies twisted, their voices became inarticulate screams, and their eyes were deep holes reflecting nothing but emptiness. It wasn't just a physical transformation. It was a total corruption of everything that remained of their souls. They were running through the nightclub now, trying to avoid the creatures, while time, seemed to accelerate. Midnight was approaching, and with it, the peak of the transformation. It was as if the clock was commanding the course of events, as if an invisible force was controlling the flow of destiny. Every step they took was a risk of becoming victims, not just to the creatures, but of something deeper, something older. This story still has so much more. Subscribe so you don't miss out. The floor beneath their feet trembled slightly. It was as if the building itself was reacting to the curse that was now taking over everything. The walls, once vibrant and colorful, now seemed to close in on them. Each corridor they explored, leading them to a darker and more lost part of the nightclub. The exit seemed impossible to reach. The door, once within reach, was now completely blocked. It was as if they were trapped, not by a physical barrier, but by a force that kept them inside this nightmare. Something was watching them, something that knew what would happen next. And they realized the power behind all of this wasn't just any curse. It was an entity that fed on fear, pain, and destruction. Those who had been chosen were being transformed by accident. They were the sacrifice. In this place, the nightclub was the altar. Every cycle, souls were offered to the dark force that inhabited the place, and whoever survived, well, they would become part of it too. In an attempt to understand how this could end, Rachel began to search the last remnants of reason in her mind. She remembered the woman with black hair, the one who seemed to know everything, who seemed to be part of it all. She wasn't just there to observe, she was part of the mechanism. The truth was more horrifying than she could imagine. The sacrifice wasn't just part of the curse, it was its heart. While Rachel tried to protect Emily, who was now practically in panic, something strange happened. A stronger, more sinister presence manifested in the center of the dance floor. Among the shadows, she saw the woman with black hair, that same figure who had been watching her from start. She was standing still, as if she were part of the darkness, her gaze fixed and indifferent to the chaos taking over the nightclub. "You're looking for answers, but the answers no longer matter," she said with a low, guttural voice. The woman, now clearly not human, revealed her true nature. She wasn't just a spectator. She was responsible for the ritual that transformed the nightclub goers into monsters. She was there to feed a demonic entity, a dark force that rose at midnight and renewed itself with each cycle. Every one of those present, those transforming, were chosen to be part of this eternal cycle. Rachel, now understanding what was at stake, tried to fight back against the presence of the woman, but it was useless. The woman raised her hands, and the shadows around them began to move like tendrils, advancing toward her and Emily. "The cycle is already underway. There's no escaping," the woman said, while the shadows enveloped them. Rachel, with a look of determination in her eyes, grabbed Emily in Jason's arms, pulling them close. "We need to get out of here," she shouted, as the shadows pressed in tighter, almost suffocating them. But the darkness was everywhere, wrapping around their limbs, pulling them toward the center of the nightclub, toward the altar of the curse. Rachel could feel her body weakening, the cold creeping in her bones, but she refused to give in. "Stay strong," Rachel shouted, but her voice cracked with fear. "We can't give up now. Hit that like button if you're hooked. This nightmare isn't over yet." As the woman's form began to dissolve into the shadows, Rachel realized that the nightclub was not just a place. It was a living thing, alive with an ancient, malevolent force. The shadows were its heartbeat, the creatures its servants, and the woman, the priestess, was just a tool, a servant of the greater evil that had controlled the nightclub for centuries. Rachel's heart raced as the ritual began to reach its climax. The door at the far end of the room, glowing ominously with a red, pulsating light, beckoned. But Rachel knew that if they didn't stop the woman, the curse would be complete, and they would all be lost. The shadows pushed forward, suffocating them. The air was thick with dread, but Rachel couldn't let herself succumb. She fought back, using every ounce of strength she had to free herself from their grip. As the pressure intensified, she made a decision. "We have to destroy it from within," she said to Emily and Jason, barely able to speak. "The door is the heart of it. We need to reach it before it's too late." With determination in her eyes, Rachel grabbed Emily and Jason's hands and dragged them toward the light. They were close, but the shadows moved faster, pulling them backward. Each step felt like a battle for their souls. Share this with your friends if you love this kind of suspense. But something shifted. The shadows began to recoil. The woman, now half-formed, raised her arms as if to finish the ritual, but there was an energy resisting her. Rachel saw it, faint but growing. The darkness around them was beginning to lose its grip. The energy from the red light at the door was intensifying, and Rachel realized the entity within the nightclub was being drawn toward it, fighting to remain in control. The priestess, struggling against the forces she had once controlled, looked desperate. "You know," she screamed, her voice echoing through the nightclub. "You think you can end it? The dance of darkness will continue." But Rachel had no intention of stopping. She had to fight, even if it cost her everything. The silence that enveloped the nightclub was deep, as if the very air was waiting for the ritual to conclude. The sound of the creature's screams and growls had diminished, replaced by an oppressive atmosphere, where even the smallest sound seemed amplified, reverberating through the prison's walls. Rachel, Emily, and Jason approached the metal door with cautious, yet quick steps, as if time were running out. The pressure was unbearable. With each breath, they felt the weight of fate drawing closer, as if the nightclub itself was watching them, waiting for the right moment to consume them. The woman with black hair was ahead, standing before the door. She watched them, her eyes dark like abysses, empty, with no trace of humanity. That cold smile on her face was no longer an enigma, but a harbinger of doom. She knew the ritual was near completion, and she no longer needed to do anything. "Just watch. You really think you can change the outcome?" the woman asked, her voice soft, but carrying an irreversible threat. "This place always feeds on your souls. Nothing can stop the cycle from repeating." Rachel, her breath heavy, looked to the others. There was a fire inside her now, a final spark of resistance. "I won't let this happen," she said, her voice firmer than ever. "We won't be just another sacrifice." But the woman only smiled again, a smile that made her teeth stand out, as if she had anticipated the inner struggle of the three. "This doesn't depend on you." With almost imperceptible motion, the woman made the shadows on the walls stir, growing denser and wider, as if they were coming to life. They stretched, turning into tendrils, and quickly advanced toward the three friends, trying to capture them, immobilize them. But Rachel, with newfound strength, leapt forward, throwing herself directly at the woman. "No," she shouted, grabbing the priestess's arms with all her might. "We're not your puppets." In a sudden, almost savage movement, the woman turned, her eyes becoming completely black, as if the light had been swallowed. She pushed Rachel back with brutal force, but before she could react, Jason and Emily were at her side, struggling to stop the woman from continuing the ritual. The moving shadows, attempting to capture them, began to writhe in agony, as if something was interfering. The nightclub, with its malignant energy, seemed to fight back, trying to absorb every ounce of resistance. It was then that Rachel looked at the metal door. The red light coming from it, pulsing and alive, began to intensify. She felt something approaching, something gigantic. The cold fear of death rushed through her, but at the same time, a strange sense of understanding filled her. They were the crossroads. The door. The door wasn't just a passage. It was the center of the ritual, the point where the souls of the sacrificed were consumed to feed the entity. To destroy it, they had to end the very source of the curse. Rachel didn't know what she was doing, but her body moved instinctively. She ran toward the door, and without hesitation, grabbed the handle. The metal was hot, burning her hands, but she didn't stop. With one final effort, the door opened. A wave of cold, heavy energy enveloped her, a vacuum that seemed to drain all strength around her. The entity, which had been just a distant presence until then, was now there, in all its monstrosity. It appeared not as a physical form, but as a presence, a colossal shadow that took over everything around it. Its eyes, if they could be called eyes, were hollow pits reflecting the abyss. The entity's mouth slowly opened, revealing a darkness so deep that it seemed to consume any trace of light. Do you dare to watch until the end? Subscribe to see what's next. But the priestess, with a look of despair, moved forward to close the door, trying to prevent the entity from being released. "You don't know what you're doing," she screamed, but it was too late. Rachel didn't hesitate. With the last of her remaining strength, she pushed the woman of black hair aside, making her fall to the ground. The door opened fully, and a wave of supernatural energy flooded the entire space. The entity, with its overwhelming presence, extended outward as if it wanted to swallow the world. But then, something surprising happened. The entity, instead of emerging, began to writhe in pain. The shadows, which had been so controlled by the priestess, were now turning against her. They enveloped her, squeezing her, as if the nightclub itself was rebelling against its master. The ritual, which had seemed perfect, was unraveling, and the energy sustaining it began to falter. "No, this can't be happening," the priestess shouted, but her voice was drowned by the growing turbulence around her. Rachel, her eyes wide open, realized what needed to be done. She had no choice. To destroy the entity, to end the curse, she would have to sacrifice herself. What was happening here wasn't just a game of survival. They were fighting against a primordial force, and the only way to destroy it would be to interrupt the cycle once and for all. She looked at Jason and Emily. "I'll finish this, no matter the cost," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "But we have to destroy this thing." Mariana, with tears in her eyes, tried to stop her. "No, don't do it." But Rachel was already running toward the center of the room, where the abyss of the entity stretched wide. With a scream of pure determination, she leaped into the darkness, and everything stopped. Share this with your friends if you love this kind of suspense. The silence that followed was absolute. There was no sound, no movement. The entity, the nightclub, the creatures, everything was frozen in a deep, unnatural stillness. Slowly, a faint light began to glow at the center of the nightclub. It grew brighter, illuminating the shadows, dissolving the evil that had consumed the place. But when the light faded, the nightclub was empty. There were no more creatures, no more priestess, just the dirty walls and the remnants of a nightmarish event. Rachel had not survived. She had sacrificed herself to break the cycle of evil, but the curse had been ended. The nightclub, without its control, collapsed into silence. There were no more creatures, no more priestess. However, the price of that sacrifice was high. The evil did not completely disappear. It hid itself, waiting for the next cycle. And somewhere, in some dark corner, the dance of darkness awaited.